I'd like to talk this morning about our greatest gift. I hope by the end of our meeting together you'll agree about our greatest gift. It's called Svadharma. Now, what does this mean? Some of us may be familiar with the word Dharma. It is a Sanskrit word which is difficult to translate easily into English. It has a wide range of meanings, but for present purposes we can take it as meaning the laws of nature, the universal laws of nature. This is Dharma, and the word swa means self, one's own. Thus the word Svadharma means the laws of nature applying to me, applying to oneself, applying to the individual. Dharma is universal, swa is individual. As we proceed with the talk, I hope the significance of this will become a little clearer. Because in English we would translate Svadharma as the word duty. I'm using the Sanskrit word because duty, I don't know, isn't perhaps such an attractive word in English. People tend to think of it as a bit heavy. And the Sanskrit word, I hope, will give us a different insight into our English word duty. Because the duty isn't just individual, it unites us with the universal. This is the significance of Svadharma. It's the individual duty which joins us to the universal. This is the subject matter of the talk this morning, Svadharma, our greatest gift. It gives us many things, but I'm going to boil them down to three. It gives us clarity, it gives us strength, and it makes us more universal. It brings us back to our true self. So, to begin with clarity, I don't know if any of you remember a man called Bernie Madoff. He was an American financier who in 2008 was jailed for a fraudulent investment scheme. He had a giant sort of Ponzi pyramid scheme where he took people's money and told them that he was investing it wisely, but he was doing anything but investing it wisely. Eventually the chickens came home to roost and he was caught and put on trial and in due course convicted and put in jail. And he died fairly recently. So it's a sorry story. About 10 years prior to that, there's a man in the school who at that time used to work for a large investment company. And he told me that they gained a new client. The new client had a lot of funds with Mr. Madoff. So this man looked at this and he didn't really know anything about Mr. Madoff, and he thought, well, I'm responsible now, the buck stops with me, I better go over from London to New York and check it out. Go to the offices of Mr. Madoff and see what they're doing. Off he went and met the people in New York. He was an experienced man, but he said, I just didn't understand really what they were doing. He didn't necessarily think it was dishonest, but he didn't understand it. And because he didn't understand it, he didn't trust it. And he thought, well, we better move this client's funds from Mr. Madoff to somewhere else, which is what happened. And it was a lot of money. 10 years later, the client was immensely grateful, because if the money had stayed where it was, it would all have been lost, or the great majority of it would have been lost. The point of the story is what the man said. I'm responsible, the buck stops with me. Which is good. It's helpful when people understand what their responsibility is and accept it. All too often in life, people either don't see their responsibility clearly, or if they do, they try and avoid it. And if something goes wrong, they try and blame somebody else. But if somebody can recognize, this is my responsibility, if something goes wrong, I'm responsible for it, it brings clarity to life. Now, this is just one worldly example, of which there could be endless examples. But this is the nature of Svadharma. It makes it clear what we should be doing, and it also makes it clear what we shouldn't be doing. I used to work as a barrister, a lawyer in England, and a lot of the cases I had were either people failing to do what they should have done, or doing what somebody else should have been doing, or doing something completely else altogether. And it was a mess, a muddle. If you, after this meeting, go out of here and drive home, there's a duty to drive carefully. And that's your duty. It's not your passenger's duty or your friend's duty, it's your duty. And this is simple. Everyone understands this. But of course it can be more subtle than that, a bit more complicated than that. But one way or another, the sense of individual responsibility clarifies life. It clarifies life for us, and it clarifies life for everyone else as well. Even the Shankaracharya, on one of the meetings I had with him, he said, my Svadharma is to ensure that you have the right direction. Which is a rather lovely statement. The sage has a responsibility to provide the right direction to those who seek it. Duties may be worldly or they may be spiritual. Svadharma may be worldly, it may be spiritual. Either way, if we recognize it, it makes life clear. It brings simplicity. So this is the first benefit that Svadharma gives to us. The second is that it strengthens us. I mentioned I used to work as a barrister. I remember once there was a man in the place I worked in. He was a bit older than me. I didn't know him all that well, but I knew him reasonably well. And his marriage had broken up. He was obviously going through a difficult time. And I didn't know anything about the circumstances. It wasn't my business, but I could see that this was an unhappy time as far as he was concerned. But I rather admired the fact that every morning he'd be at work, sitting at his desk, doing his job. And the impression was that this was very helpful as far as he was concerned. Our Svadharma gets us out of bed in the morning. That may not sound much, but in actual fact it can be a great deal. It gets us out of bed and gets us to where we should be. And with that we are strengthened. Malta had its brush with Napoleon, as did England have its brush with Napoleon. More than a brush. And for quite a long time, the British fleet was blockading France. These were small ships, bigger than this room, but not that much bigger than this room. And they would be on the Atlantic Ocean for month after month, blockading the French ports. It must have been the most arduous, difficult thing to do. And these people must have had a very, very strong sense of duty. You can read some of the accounts and their personal recollections. This is what shines through. Svadharma gives strength. Life isn't always easy. Life can have its problems, its difficulties, its hardships, and the Svadharma gives the resilience to meet all of those. And sometimes people who you wouldn't think have that much strength turn out to have an enormous amount of strength. Because of this inner understanding. So this is a great benefit. The Svadharma gives us the strength to meet these problematic aspects of life. It gives us the strength to rise above what I like, what I don't like. The third aspect of Svadharma is that it universalizes us. It makes us larger. Because it's the individual aspect of the laws of nature combined with the universal aspect. There was an American woman called Helen Keller. She was born at the end of the 19th century. She died, I think, in about 1960s. And at a very young age, she was rendered blind and deaf. She had the great grace of meeting another woman, Anne Sullivan, who somehow helped her, and Helen Keller went on to lecture and teach, and she was an extraordinary person. There's a little quote from her. She said, "I long to accomplish a great and noble task, but it is my duty to accomplish small tasks as if they were great and noble." A rather lovely statement. I long to accomplish a great and noble task, but it is my duty to accomplish small tasks as if they were great and noble. Whatever it is we have to do in our lives may seem small, it may seem rather insignificant. And we can look at it as small and insignificant. On the other hand, we can say, no, it's not small, it's not insignificant. I can perform this as if it is great and noble, as if it does affect everyone in some way. So, this is a lovely example. Whatever the small and insignificant tasks which come our way, the small insignificant duties in life we have, we can treat them as if they are great and noble. If we do, we tend to perform them rather better. We give finer attention to them, we're not careless about them. We give them our love, we give them our time, we give them our attention. And so the tasks do become great and noble. There's another man in the school, he makes flutes. I believe he's one of the last flute makers in the UK. I'm not sure, but there can't be many. Anyway, as far as he's concerned, it's a calling. It's his life. And every aspect of it, from selecting the wood, I may get the details slightly wrong, but he went to Tanzania and found wood in Tanzania. And he just knew that this wood would make good flutes. So he bought quite a lot of wood from Tanzania. And he's sufficiently sort of attuned that he can recognize which wood will make good flutes and which wood won't make good flutes. It's a 6-year process because the wood has to be seasoned, and then the flute is worked on, and it has to wait a time, and the whole thing takes 6 years. At the end of which, when the flute is complete, he puts it in a box and closes the lid and says a little prayer to the Absolute, and it's like a child going off. So this is his job. Now you could say any one of these particular tasks along the way is rather small and insignificant. But as far as he's concerned, it's not. It's sacred. Each flute is sacred. The way he looks at it is that basically he wants musicians to have flutes. He doesn't want them to be too expensive, and most musicians tend not to be that rich. So at the beginning of the year, he'll work out how much money he and his family are going to need, and works out how many flutes he's going to be able to make and sell that year, and he divides one by the other, and that's how much he charges for the flute. So the Svadharma can make life beautiful. When somebody has a sense of calling like that, then nothing is too much trouble, is it? And whether the particular recipient understands and knows how much has gone into this is secondary, because he knows, and he couldn't possibly do a second-rate job. Even if he could manage to sell the flute, perhaps for twice the money, he wouldn't. He couldn't bring in all conscience himself to do that. And it's the same with any great craftsman, any great skilled person. Their work is, as far as they're concerned, it's for something higher. It's something sacred. I recall being told that at Chartres Cathedral in France, one of the most beautiful of the cathedrals, if not the most beautiful of the cathedrals, the masonry is extraordinary, and there are statues all around the building, but there are statues on the roof which nobody is going to see, or very few people. To get to where they are, it's very, very difficult. And the conclusion is that the people who did it thought, well, the only person who's going to see this is God, and we're going to make these as beautiful as possible. So no other human being, or very few other human beings, are going to see them. That didn't matter. Their work was sacred. And they were going to do it in the finest, the best, the most beautiful way it could possibly be done. When somebody has this sort of idea, when their life is governed in this kind of way, then they join with the universal. They're made larger. They're made sacred, if I can put it that way. In the Bhagavad Gita, there are some verses which say that we as human beings have a duty to ourselves. We have a duty to raise ourselves up, to be ourselves, to be true to ourselves. We should be careful not to be untrue to ourselves. We shouldn't let ourselves down. So we should raise ourselves up. This is our Svadharma. We should realize ourselves not as small and limited, but as great, unlimited. Understanding this, then we can be of great service. Service to humanity. In being of service to humanity, we realize ourselves as universal beings, not just individual beings. This is the greatest gift of Svadharma. This is our route back to the universal. And it's individual. One person's route will be different from another person's route. The destination is the same, but how we get there is individual. Svadharma is the route map. It tells us where to go, how to get there. So I hope when somebody says something like, do your duty, we can perhaps not think, oh my goodness, that sounds awful. That sounds like a terrible imposition. It sounds terribly dull. I hope perhaps the response can be, that's very good. I'd like to be somebody who does my duty, who fulfills my Svadharma. Whether other people do their duty or not, that's up to them. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to do my utmost to fulfill this. This can be the idea. It's like giving one's word. We can value our word, we can treasure it, we can respect it, so that if we give our word, we will fulfill it. Or not. We can not respect our word. We can devalue it. And I might say, well, I'll be here at such and time and do this, and well, if it suits me, I will be, but something better may come up. I may get a more attractive offer for Friday night. One response leads to greater strength and universality. The other one leads to a lack of strength. Easy come, easy go. Easy come, easy go may be pleasant, may be attractive, but it's not strengthening. It doesn't, in the end, lead us to ourself. Now, what other people do, whether they respect their word when it's given, that's up to them. But we can have the idea, as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to do everything possible to fulfill what I say. This is my Svadharma. I've said this, and I'll fulfill it. It does perhaps make us a little cautious about what we say. We should be careful about promising something which is easy to promise but not necessarily possible to fulfill. So this is the idea of Svadharma. Unfortunately, it's all too common to see in the world people not fulfilling their responsibilities. Sometimes they pretend to fulfill the responsibility but don't actually do so, and when something goes wrong, they blame everyone in sight. And when you get this lack of personal responsibility, families begin to break down, societies begin to break down, everything begins to break down. On the other hand, when people are careful, when they're attentive, when they fulfill their responsibility, things build up again. This is what I wanted to speak about, our greatest gift, Svadharma. I began this meeting with the Sanskrit invocation, dedication, Paramatmane Namah. Paramatman is the supreme best self, the highest self. And the word Namah means an offering. Anything we do can be an offering to the very best self. Not just of one's own self, but everywhere, to everyone. It can be a service to the very best self, to the highest truth, even if it's apparently small and insignificant. Because in reality, if we give it the attention it deserves, nothing is small and insignificant. And no one is small and insignificant.